Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 220, James Cochran. James Cochran died in London in 1906. He was described as a wealthy Australian who left an estate worth nearly £100,000. James Cochran was born in 1827 in Cochran, Northern Ireland, to John Cochran and Catherine Black. He arrived in Australia with his brother John in 1844. He left Ireland owing to his weak health, and upon coming to Australia, he lived to well over 80 years old. The first station he owned was Bealaba on the Loddon in Victoria, and he married Rosetta McNeil in Melbourne on the 28th of December 1857. Their marriage notice was featured in the Belfast Newsletter in Northern Ireland on the 20th of March 1858, stating that on the 28th of December at St Paul's Church in Melbourne, Australia, James Cochran, Esquire, of Bealaba, Avoca, to Rosetta, daughter of Hugh McNeil, Esquire, of Annaville, Ballycastle. Rosetta was the daughter of Hugh McNeil and Anne Kirkpatrick, and Rosetta and James had 11 children. The first that's featured of James is on the 5th of September 1859 in the Maryborough and Dunolly Advertiser. For sale, sheep and station. For sale, a well-grassed and watered station known as Bealaba, comprising an area of 30,000 acres with a frontage of 2.5 miles of the Avoca River, as well as good creeks all through the run, estimated to carry 6,000 sheep or 800 head of cattle. The improvements are substantial and complete, comprising of a house for the reception of a family and all the needful outbuildings, standing at 320 acres of purchased land, all fenced, and 30 acres under crop. The above will be sold with 2,000 sheep, and terms are liberal. Apply to the proprietor, James Cochran, address Bealaba, Cochran's Post Office. And on the 6th of January 1860, he advertised horses for sale at Dunolly. The auctioneers received instructions from James Cochran, Esquire of Bealaba Station, to offer a public auction at the Bull and Mouth Hotel at Dunolly, the whole stud of horses on Bealaba Station, consisting of 30 head of stock horses and light and heavy draft, and good hacks and mares with foals at foot and unbroken stock. On the 11th of October 1862, in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times, wanted a responsible man to take charge of and travel a flock of fat sheep to the Melbourne market, must know the road well and give references to trustworthiness. Apply to James Cochran at Widgewa at Colombo Creek. So it seems that he sold the property down near Avoca and has moved up to near Urana in southern New South Wales in the Riverina region. On the 15th of August 1863 in the Pastoral Times, wanted a blacksmith, must be a good shoer and accustomed to country work. Apply to James Cochran, Widgewa, care of Druidry Post Office. On the 21st of November 1867 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Premier Fleece, Mr James Cochran of Widgewa is likely to carry off the palm on the Yanko for the weight of fleece and quality this season. The average clip of the flocks is 3 pounds 7 ounces for a full-grown sheep and 1.25 pounds for lambs of washed wool. And in June 1872 in the Australian Town and Country Journal, stated that the races being over, the route that I took was via Widgewa and the Murrumbidgee. Mr Lloyd of Yama Station thoughtfully sent on my horse by a servant and drove to Widgewa, a distance of 20 miles. The Widgewa gates were entered and other paddocks and a number of other gates passed through when the house was reached. We left Urana at 4 p.m. and accomplished the journey in less than 3 hours. We were warmly welcomed by the Lord of Widgewa, James Cochran, Esquire, J.P. Bush hospitality was proverbial, and Widgewa was a glorious example of the rule. After dinner, a most pleasant evening was spent, and on the following morning, refreshed and exuberant, we were prepared for an inspection of this fine homestead. Widgewa House and buildings are in the form of a square. It's a very convenient arrangement for all connected with the station. At the extreme end is a pleasant residence, spacious and well constructed of pine, and having a partially trellis-work veranda in front and on the sides. There's a long porchway, also trellised, connecting the kitchen with the house. At another corner is Bachelor's Hall, the the retreat for moderate indulgence after dinner on the part of the gentlemen, and sleeping apartments for the bachelors generally. At the other end of the square is the station store, well stocked with drapery, groceries, and everything else requisite for bush purposes. Before the house is a pleasant shrubbery, a garden and vineyard. In the centre of the square, there is an iron tank on 4 pillars capable of containing 3,000 gallons of water. It is filled by a force pump from the Colombo Creek below, and hose pipes laid on from the tank water in every part of the garden and orchard in front of the residence. The homestead is on top of a sandhill of moderate height. From the veranda, a good part of the station is seen. When Mr. Cochran took possession, living at Widgewa, it created considerable discomfort for the family through the sand being blown about, causing ophthalmia. Having placed a fence around the sandhill, Mr. Cochran planted it with couch grass, which had the effect of thoroughly laying the sand, and in its place, or rather over, it is now growing a fine lawn, soft as velvet. Widgewa stands prominent amongst the principalities of the Riverina for 3 things: the extent of its improvements and the completeness of the station. It covers 92,000 acres, and it's divided and subdivided into 9 paddocks, varying in size from 5,000 to 15,000 acres, beside a number of smaller paddocks for home use. The principal watercourse is the Colombo Creek, which draws its water from the Yanko. A sum of £20,000 was expended on the work, and Mr. Cochran contributed £2,000 as his share towards the carrying out of diversion of water from the Murrumbidgee to the Yanko. The Colombo has an abundance of Murray cod and perch. Other sums of money have been expended in making dams and securing a good water supply for Widgewa. There are 12 or 13 tanks or dams on the station, many slabbed to keep the earth from falling in. The station gives constant employment to 25 or 30 men, besides a large number in shearing seasons. The station carries 50,000 sheep. The wool shed is a good large structure. Over £15,000 has been expended in improving Widgewa since Mr. Cochran came over from Victoria and bought the station. There are over 150 miles of fencing at Widgewa, which cost £50 per mile. After an inspection of all these improvements, one must come to the conclusion that Widgewa is unquestionably one of the most complete and compact stations of the Riverina. So James Cochran must have done quite well by this stage, as 2 years later, on the 11th of February 1874, in the Wagga Wagga Express and Murrumbidgee District Advertiser, bound for Europe, Mr. and Mrs. James Cochran of Widgewa are about to sail for England for a year's tour of Europe. We wish them and their children a pleasant voyage, good health to enjoy their absence from Australia, and light hearts to return and enjoy the comforts of Widgewa. So Rosetta and James were 46 at this time, and their children, John 15, James 13, Henry 10, Constance 7, Fanny 4 and Kathleen 1 left Australia on the Sobrian from Melbourne and arrived in London in the May. Before they left, in the Melbourne Argus on the 12th of February 1874, Kirk's Bazaar announced, with James Cochran, Esquire of Widgewa, sailing for England on the Sobrian, that he wished to sell by auction the following: the whole of his well-known stud carriage and harnesses, a pair of handsome brown carriage horses, thoroughly quiet and staunch in the harness and can be ridden, a bay horse 6 years old that was imported, that's a good buggy horse, an elegant family barouche, shifting top, glass front and sides, pole and shafts complete, can be used as an open or closed carriage, made by Bedford and Sons in London and has only 12 months' wear, a queen's phaeton with hood, a child's seat, pole and shafts very recently built and in excellent order, sets of best quality double harnesses, extra plated, nearly new, a set of superior buggy harnesses, gentlemen's saddles and bridles, boys' saddles and bridles, a girl's pad saddle, spare harness and horse clothing, also a Victorian phaeton, a bay horse that goes in harness or saddle, a set of single buggy harnesses. To gentlemen requiring good family turnouts, an inspection of the above is respectfully requested. And then 3 years later, in July 1877, with James and Rosetta now 50, their children, John, James, Constance, Fanny, Kathleen and Violet, now who was 1, left England on the ship Durham from Gravesend, Kent, and arrived in Melbourne on the 1st of October 1877. So they were away for nearly 3.5 years. On the 5th of October 1878, in the Sydney Mail, the Wagga Gold Cup. This cup, the value of which is 100 sovereigns, was presented to the Murrumbidgee Turf Club by Mr. James Cochran of Widgewa. On the 11th of March 1881 in the Albury Banner, there was a £10 reward. Several parties have lately been in the habit of forcing a passage across my purchased land where no public road exists, cutting and breaking down fences and leaving them open and destroying gates, going from Urana to the Murrumbidgee and from Yanko Creek to Emu Plains and Brookong. I therefore offer the above reward for private information that will lead to the conviction of anyone trespassing or damaging my property. The name of the informant will not be revealed unless absolutely required for prosecuting the case in the court. James Cochran of Widgewa. On the 4th of June 1881 in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times, the Urana Hospital. This building is under construction. The foundation stone was to be laid yesterday by Mr. James Cochran of Widgewa, having consented to perform the ceremony. And a little more information about the opening of the hospital. Monday last was a red letter day in the history of Urana, the country town situated in the most flourishing part of the Riverina and the future terminus of an important line of railway, now about to be carried out by the present government. The interesting ceremony of laying the foundation stone of the Urana Hospital took place in the presence of a large concourse of people representing all classes. Before laying the stone, a beautifully engraved silver trowel with ivory handle was presented to Mrs. James Cochran of Widgewa, bearing the following inscription: Urana Hospital, foundation stone kindly laid by Mrs. James Cochran at the request of the committee on the 6th of June 1881, and to her this memorial trowel is respectfully presented. A large marquee was erected on the grounds for the accommodation for the ladies and was gaily decorated with flags, the British ensign floating at the masthead. The company was received by the building committee, and the Urana brass band, who kindly gave their services for the occasion, was conducted by Professor Holzapfel, welcoming the guests of the day by playing lively music. 2 years later, on the 28th of July 1883 in the Sydney Evening News, said that a grand ball was given by Mr. James Cochran of Widgewa Station last night, and visitors from all parts of the district were present. James Cochran sold out, and Mr. J.S. Horsfall purchased Widgewa in 1887. The Cochran family then proceeded to live in England permanently. On the 31st of March 1901, it stated that Rosetta and James were living by their own means with their daughter Ida, who was 27, and Violet, 25, as well as their 2 domestic servants, and were living at Hyde Park Gate in Kensington, London. And on the 3rd of July 1906 in the Bathurst National Advocate, it announced that James Cochran has died in London. He was 79 years old and died at his home in Kensington. And in the Orange Leader on the 30th of October 1906, it announces that the estate of James Cochran, late of Widgewa Station, died in London on the 28th of June, and his estate was valued at £97,148, of which £5,000 was of English property. In the Burruan News in New South Wales on the 2nd of November 1906, it announces the proceeds of his estate in a little more detail. James Cochran, late of Widgewa Station, New South Wales, died at Hyde Park Gate in London on the 28th of June. His probate's just been granted in Sydney. By his last will, the deceased appointed Mr. Clement Usell of Kingston in England and his eldest daughter, Mrs. Constance Rosetta Bulltill, executors and trustees. He bequeathed to his widow, Rosetta Cochran, the whole of his household effects and £500 to be paid to her immediately after his death. The sum of £500 was bequeathed to John James Falconer of William Street, Melbourne, £300 to Alice Glass, daughter of James Glass of Belfast, Ireland, and £300 to Mary Remington, the daughter of the late Robert Remington, warehouseman of Sydney. The deceased devised the residue of his real and personal estate to his trustees upon trust for his widow and daughters, Mrs. Constance Rosetta Bulltill, Mrs. Fanny Josephine Rook, wife of Ernest Morley Rook, Ida Kathleen Cochran, and Violet Evelyn Cochran in equal shares. The testator also directed that his widow and daughters should undertake the responsibility of maintaining and supporting his son, John Augustus Cochran, and the testator's brother, George Black Cochran, for their respective lives, and the net value of the New South Wales estate was sworn in at £92,081, and the gross value of his English estate £5,067. So his children, the firstborn was John Augustus Cochran, who was born on the 5th of January 1859 at Bialabera Avoca. He was living at Barnwood, Gloucestershire in England on the 29th of September 1939, stating he was a sheep farmer and a patient of Barnwood House, a private mental hospital in Barnwood, Gloucester, England. He died on the 19th of July 1941 in Gloucester, hence why the will stated his wife and daughters were to support him. His probate stated that all of his effects were to go to Ida Kathleen Cochran, his sister, who was a spinster, and his effects came in at £2,163. The second born was James Alfred Cochran, who was born in 1860 in Fitzroy, Victoria. He purchased North Walkall Station in about 1886, which is near Deniliquin in southern New South Wales. James married Barbara Salter Henderson at St James's Cathedral in Melbourne on the 8th of February 1887. The marriage was announced in the Melbourne Herald. Cochran Henderson, James Alfred, son of James Cochran of Widgewa near Urana, New South Wales, to Barbara Salter, only daughter of William Henderson, late of Bankshead, Fifeshire, Scotland. They had 3 children, Donald, Hazel and Yvonne. Yvonne was nearly 2 when her father died, and James died on the 19th of January 1891, aged only 31, and he's buried at Deniliquin Cemetery. On the 24th of January 1891 in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times, the suicide of Mr. J.A. Cochran, coroner's inquest. An inquest on the body of Mr. James Cochran, who shot himself through the head with a revolver on Monday evening, was heard before Dr. Noyes, the district coroner, at North Walkall Station on Wednesday morning. The following evidence was taken. William Thompson deposed he was a labourer at North Walkall. He'd seen the body. It was that of James Alfred Cochran. The witness was in the employ of James and last saw him alive on Monday evening at 9 o'clock. He was on the veranda of his station house smoking. He talked to the witness quite rationally on station matters. He left the witness to go into the house to get a glass of whiskey. He was quite sober and rational. During the day he rambled in his talk and was constantly kneeling down to pray. He was not in his right mind during that or the previous day. The witness with others watched him constantly, fearing that he would do himself some harm. The witness took out of his room everything by which he could injure himself. When the deceased came into the house to get a drink, the witness looked through the window and saw him take 3 glasses of whiskey, one after the other. He came out and said good night as he was going to lie down. He went to his room and the witness bid him good night, but the witness did not leave the veranda. He stopped close to his door. About 3 minutes after he went into his room, the witness heard a report, and the witness then ran into the room and saw the deceased on his floor with his head on the fender. He saw a wound in his forehead and a revolver lying by his right hand. He felt his heart and found that he was dead. The revolver produced is one found by the side of the body. It is loaded with the exception of one chamber, which had been recently discharged. He'd been in the employ of the deceased for the past 2 years and believed that he used to drink to excess. He was peculiar in his ways. On Sunday evening last, the witness came to the home station. The deceased was then being watched by 2 of the men. He was very violent that afternoon and had appeared to have been drinking. When he left the witness to go to his bedroom, he appeared quite sober and sensible. He said good night, and the witness did not suspect he would do himself any harm. The revolver was secreted from a carpenter's tool chest in the room. The only whiskey the deceased had during the day was 1 nobbler in the forenoon and 3 in the evening. He did not appear to be worse for liquor when he said good night. Robert Hawkins deposed that he was a groom and storekeeper at North Walkall Station and had been in the employ for 12 months. Since Mrs. Cochran left, the witness had looked after the deceased, doing his room, etc. On the Sunday morning the witness went to his room. The deceased would not allow him in. He was worse for liquor. The witness returned in half an hour but could not find him. He searched through the house and could not find him. He then went to the hut of a man named Young and together went to look for Mr. Cochran down at the creek. They saw him on the other side of the creek kneeling down praying. He got up and made for the river. The witness swam across and held him until the other man came up. They then brought him home and watched him that day and the next night. He was very violent and did not sleep. On Monday, the witness left the station to go for a doctor and did not see Mr. Cochran again alive. He said that the deceased was always peculiar in his manner, but not always from the effects of drink. He appeared to be suffering from a religious mania, walking up and down the veranda and dropping to his knees praying. This was about an hour before his death. Dr. Friedman was summoned to attend the deceased. On arriving at the station, he heard that Mr. Cochran had shot himself. He went into the room and found him lying on his back with his head resting on the edge of the fender. His left hand was resting on his hip and his right arm extended by his side. Between his arm and the side was a revolver, the one produced with one barrel recently been discharged. On examining the witness, he found a small wound in the centre of his forehead from which blood flowed freely. The wound had been caused by a bullet. The weapon had been held very close to the head, as the skin was discoloured around the wound by the powder. Death must have been instantaneous, and he believed that the deceased must have laid down in the position in which he was found before firing the shot. He had known the deceased for some time. He was eccentric in his ways and occasionally had fits of intemperance. From knowledge of the deceased and from evidence of the witnesses, he was of the opinion the deceased committed the fatal act when suffering from temporary insanity. The jury found the following verdict: that James Alfred Cochran died by shooting himself with a revolver whilst of unsound mind. In October 1891 in Melbourne, Barbara was only 26 and now widowed. Their children were Donald 3, Hazel 2 and Yvonne 1. They went with John's sister Fanny, who was 21 at the time, on the ship Arroya from Australia to London. So a little on the three children. Donald was born in 1887 in St Kilda. He was in the Cadets in Ireland in 1911 when he was 23, and in 1912 he became a lieutenant and served with the Royal Artillery. He then became captain but was killed in action on the 8th of May 1915 in Belgium when he was only 27. Hazel was born in 1889 in East Melbourne, and she married Noel Monson Delaporte Beresford Piers on the 11th of December 1912 in Chelsea, London. They divorced in 1924. Then Hazel married Edward Kemble Twiss, who was 6 years older than her, in London in July 1925. Hazel died in 1962 at the age of 73 at Ashford Hospital in Middlesex. On the 17th of September 1962, she left all of her proceeds to her sister, Yvonne Barbara Newhouse, a widow, which came in at a little over £5,000. The youngest, Yvonne, was born in 1890 in Deniliquin. She married George Hardy, who was 6 years older than her, at the Royal Hospital Chapel in Greenwich, London, on the 31st of January 1912. On the 17th of August 1917 in London, George Hardy, who was now a lieutenant in the 25th Northumberland Fusiliers, filed for divorce from Yvonne on the grounds of her adulterous behaviour with Paul Newhouse. They were divorced on the 11th of November 1918 after 6 years of marriage. Yvonne and Paul Newhouse married in London in January 1919 when Yvonne was 28 and Paul 32. Paul died in 1933 and Yvonne died in January 1976 in Devon, and she was 85 years old. Barbara remarried on the 26th of May 1894, and it was announced in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times. On the 17th of April, by special licence at St Bride's Church in London, that Henry Charles Fitzroy Somerset of Tredowan, Montgomeryshire, late captain of the Shropshire Light Infantry and second son of the late Pullet George Henry Somerset MP, Monmouthshire, to Barbara Salter, widow of the late James Alfred Cochran of North Walkall Station, Riverina, Australia, second son of James Cochran, late of Widgewa, New South Wales. The next child of James and Rosetta Cochran was Francis Hugh Cochran, who was born on the 29th of January 1862 at Colombo Creek in New South Wales. He died on the 14th of November 1871 in Wagga. He was only 9 years and 10 months old, and the cause of death was effusion of the brain. He's buried at Morunda, New South Wales, at the Bunongo Cemetery. And Morunda's a small town quite close to Urana. Their fourth child was Henry Darlot Cochran, who was born in February 1865 in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. He died on the 24th of April 1877 in Croydon, Surrey, England. The Deniliquin Pastoral Times announced his death, stating that he died at Sycamore Lodge, Emily, London, of typhoid fever, and he was the fourth son of James Cochran, aged only 12 years and 2 months. The fifth child was Constance Rosetta Cochran. She was born on the 8th of July 1867 in St Kilda, Victoria, and her birth was announced in the Melbourne Age. Cochran, on the 8th of July at Ackland Street, St Kilda, the wife of James Cochran, Esquire of Widgewa, New South Wales, of a daughter. And on the 8th of September 1893, in the Melbourne Table Talk, the engagement is announced in London of Mr. Harry Bullteal, second son of Mr. John Bullteal of Pamfleet in Devon, to Miss Constance Rosetta Cochran, eldest daughter of Mr. James Cochran, formerly of Widgewar in New South Wales. And they married on November the 1st, 1893, at St Margaret's in Westminster, London. The Reverend was the cousin of the groom, and he was assisted by Reverend Loftus Hopkins, who was the cousin of the bride. It says Harry Bullteal of St John's Estate, Newara, Elevar, Ceylon, second son of John Crocker Bullteal of Pamfleet, Devon, to Constance Rosetta, eldest daughter of James Cochran, formerly of Widgewar, Riverina, New South Wales. So in 1906, with the death of James Cochran, it said that Constance Rosetta Bullteal, the wife of Harry Bullteal, received effects worth a little over £5,000 from her brother. In 1915, Rosetta McKildo Cochran passed away, and in her probate, she gave Constance nearly £12,500 in her will, and Constance's husband died in 1929. So in September 1939, Constance, at the age of 72, was living with her sister, Kathleen Ida Cochran, who was 66, at Dawlish, which is a seaside resort town on the south coast of Devon. And Constance died on the 13th of March 1942 at Elwyn's Nursing Home in Tynemouth, Devon. She was 74. In her probate, she gave to her sisters, Violet Evelyn Cochran and Ida Kathleen Cochran, both spinsters, £2,190. The sixth child was Fanny Josephine Cochran, who was born on the 20th of August 1869 in Wagga Wagga. Fanny married Ernest Morley Rooke when she was 23 and he was 27 at St Margaret's in Westminster, London on the 2nd of February 1893. They had a son, Dennis Munro Morley Rooke, on the 7th of June 1893 in India. On the 21st of August 1914, Dennis was in Morfordville, Adelaide, and he was a carpenter. He enlisted in World War I. He was 25 years and 2 months at the time of his enlistment, and he stated that his father, Morley Rooke, was living at Hove, Sussex. He was a driver who was posted in the 3rd Field Company Engineers. His unit embarked from Melbourne on board the Transport A2 on the 22nd of September 1914. Dennis received gunshot injuries to his heel whilst on active service and was admitted to a hospital in Malta on the 16th of July 1915 and was then transferred back to London. He was discharged from the Australian Army, 1st Division of Engineers in England on the 23rd of September 1915, as he'd received a commission in the Royal Field Artillery. He was then appointed Second Lieutenant on probation in the Royal Field Artillery Special Services at Woolwich, and at the time he was living at his father's residence in Hove, Sussex. He left England from Lancashire on the 28th of August 1926 aboard the ship Bootshire and headed for Adelaide. It then stated that Dennis, aged 36, living at the time at Chicago, Illinois, married Velma Marguerite Howell of Birmingham, Alabama, and they married at Moline, Illinois in 1929. It then stated that on the 27th of October 1948, that Dennis, aged 55, a salesman, and his mother, Fanny Josephine Rooke, aged 79, left New York headed for London. Dennis Munro Morley Rooke died in New York in February 1979 when he was 85. Ernest died in 1923. Fanny, at the age of 70, was living at Portsmouth, Hampshire, and then she left on the 10th of June 1946 at the age of 76 to travel to New York, and she lived in Jacksonville, Florida during 1947 and 1948 and died after 1948. The seventh child, Ada Mary Cochran, was born in August 1871 in Wagga Wagga. She died on the 17th of July 1872 in Wagga. She was only 10.5 months, and she's buried at Maroondah Cemetery as well. The eighth child, Ida Kathleen Cochran, was born on the 25th of October 1873 in St Kilda, Victoria. She received probate from her brother, John Cochran, in 1942. She was living in Wales at the time and she received £2,100. She then received probate from her sister, Constance Bullteal, in October 1942 when she was living in Wales, and that was £2,190. By 1946, she was living in Kensington, England, with her sister at the Templeton Hotel, and she died on the 24th of March 1962 at Starcross, Devon, England, when she was 88. The ninth child was Hugh Morrison Cochran, who was born in 1874 in St Kilda and may not have lived beyond infancy, as I could not find any death record for him. There was a little boy that was born in Fitzroy in 1875 as well that was unnamed. And the 11th child was Violet Evelyn Cochran, who was born on the 5th of January 1876 at Upper Norwood in London, England. She received the probate from her sister, Constance Bull-Teal, in 1942 with her sister. That was £2,000. And in 1946, she was living with her sister Ida at the Templeton Hotel in Kensington. Violet died at the Croft, Starcross, Devonshire, on the 19th of June 1956 when she was 80 years old. James Cochran had a brother, John Cochran, who was born on the 7th of June 1818 in Cochran, Ireland. He arrived in Victoria with his brother in 1844. On the 3rd of August 1871 in Melbourne, it announced his marriage. At the residence of the bride's brother-in-law in Collins Street East, John Cochran, Esquire, married Mary Kate McNulty, the second daughter of the late George McNulty, Esquire, MD of Dublin. John was 53 when they married, and Mary was 23 years younger than him. They had 7 children together, and in 1872 they owned Burrabogie Station in New South Wales. John died on the 27th of November 1903 in Camberwell, Victoria. The Aubrey Banner and Wodonga Express announced his death. The late Mr. John Cochran, who died at Hazelwood, Camberwell, on Friday last, aged 85, was a colonist of 58 years, landing in Melbourne from Coleraine in 1845 with his brother Mr. James Cochran, owner of Widgewa and other stations. His first experience in pastoral pursuits was at Beelaba, where he took up land in the early 40s. He was then associated with Mr. Samuel McCackey at Coonong Station and in Burrabogie with Mr. Henry Lonan. He also had interests in Eva Downs, Meredith, Menzies and other properties. Mr. Cochran, like many other squatters, met with severe reverses during the bank failures. He was one of the very earliest members of the Victoria Racing Club. With his cousin, Mr. John Mackenzie, and Mr. George Coppin, they were the prime movers in founding the Old Colonists Association. And John's wife, Mary, died on the 10th of May 1918 in Elstonwick. It stated that she was the widow of the late John Cochran, formerly of Burrabogie and Coonong Stations in New South Wales, and Hazelwood of Camberwell in Melbourne. She left a will dated the 17th of October 1916, and she had personal property valued at £18,500, and she left it to her children, relatives and friends. The children of John and Mary Cochran. The firstborn was Catherine Mabel Cochran. She was born on the 20th of August 1871 in St Kilda. On the 2nd of July 1913, it mentioned that Catherine Mabel Cochran was a member of the firm Pauline and She of the Centreway in Collins Street. She died on the 11th of September 1927 in Elstonwick, and she did not marry. She was 56 years old. Their second child, Muriel Elizabeth Cochran, was born in 1872. On the 10th of December 1913, she married Theodore Louis Hopton Hanfield, who was the 4th son of the late F.O. Hanfield and Mrs. Hanfield of Hampton. Muriel was 41 and Theodore 42. They had a son, Peter Paul Eardley Tatham Hanfield, who was born in 1916, and he died on the 15th of February 1942 off Malta. His plane was shot down off Malta when it was on its delivery flight from Egypt. Peter was a sergeant at that time, and he also had a pilot, Edwin Holloway, with him, as well as James Richards. And in the Melbourne Argus on the 21st of August 1942, it says that Peter Paul Hanfield, RAAF, who was posted missing, believed killed over the sea as a result of enemy action several months ago, is now presumed dead. He trained in Canada and was sent to England and transferred to the RAF Coastal Command and left with his unit for Egypt. He was educated at Glamorgan, Geelong Grammar School, Longranong College, and was the eldest son of Mr. and Mrs. T.L. Hanfield. His brother is also in the RAAF. Muriel died in 1960 in Preston, Victoria, aged 88. Their third child, John Cochran Jr., was born on the 10th of June 1874 at Vercourt at St Kilda. On the 14th of April 1908, in the Church of the Holy Trinity at Turfentine, Johannesburg, South Africa, he married Mary Florence Sharp. When he was 33 and Mary 19, they had 5 children. John was an insurance manager, and he died on the 2nd of December 1934 in Johannesburg, aged 60. Their fourth child, Thomas Hazelton Cochran, was born in 1877 in Hawthorn, Victoria. He was a journalist. On the 24th of January 1948 in the Sydney Morning Herald, It says, I've just received the usual belated Christmas present from my friend Thomas Hazelton Cochran, that evergreen Australian who, after countless years in England, is now frolicking with other passengers homeward bound on the SS Orion. Mr. Cochran, as all the world knows, is usually to be found encrusted with earls in the fashionable haunts of London's West End. It was he to whom the late Kaiser alluded as far back as 1912 when he quaveringly exclaimed, "It's that man again." Mr. Cochran has selected for his Yuletide tribute this year a recently published manual entitled The Theory and Practice of Gamemanship, or the Art of Winning Games Without Actually Cheating. He died in 1963 in Armidale, Victoria, aged 86. Their fifth child, George Gray Cochran, was born in 1877 in Hawthorn, Victoria. He married Constance Mary Isabel Ormond Stuckey in October 1906 in Melbourne. Constance had married John George Ross in Gunning, New South Wales in 1903, but he had died in 1904. They had a daughter on the 31st of August 1907. She was named Margaret Ormond Cochran, and she died on the 21st of November 1995 in Melbourne, and she did not marry. On the 30th of August 1929, in the Melbourne Sun, it mentions that George Gray Cochran was a tyre repairer living in King Street, and in 1951 it announced the death of Constance Ormond Cochran at her home at Tivoli Place in South Yarra, and George died in 1952 in Victoria, aged 75. Their sixth child was Ida Winifred Cochran, who was born in 1879 in Hawthorn, Victoria, and she died in 1908 in Sandringham, Victoria, aged only 29. Their seventh child was Frank Eardley Cochran, who was born in 1882 in Victoria. He fought in the Boer War as well as in World War I, and he was killed in action in France on the 24th of March 1918. He'd become a brigadier major, and he was in the 2nd South African Infantry as well. And on the 13th of June 1919, and then it mentions the announcement of their son, Mrs. John Cochran, has received a cable from the War Office to the effect that her son, Major Frank Eardley Cochran of the South African Infantry, has been missing since the 24th of March. He left for South Africa as a member of the 1st Victorian Bushmen's Contingent during the Boer War. He was invalided at home and returned again with the 1st Commonwealth Contingent. At the cessation of the Boer War, he remained in South Africa. At the outbreak of the present war, he fought through the German South West African campaign as staff captain. He then left for France with the South African Infantry and has been in France for the last 18 months and attained the rank of Major. Major Cochran's one of the leading South African tennis players, having won numerous championships. So from humble beginnings, with two brothers coming out to Australia in as early as 1844, and particularly for James Cochran, doing very well for himself.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.